is truly one of the great honors of my life. And beyond awards, John and I were discussing this. We saved millions and millions of lives.
This is shocking.
United States of America.
This is Today As It Happened. Good Friday evening to you. I'm Andrew Rafferty here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day, from the FIFA World Cup drawing at the Kennedy Center to a consequential CDC decision on vaccine recommendations for newborns. But first, this morning we took a look at the Supreme Court's move to allow Texas to use its newly redrawn district maps that favor Republican candidates. And another story I know you've been following has to do with those congressional redistricting maps in Texas. This has to do with the Lone Star State, but could presumably impact the entire nation come the midterms next year. What can you tell us about a Supreme Court decision last night?
Yeah, Governor Greg Abbott had redistricted Texas for Republicans to pick up 5 seats there. It was challenged in the courts. A lower court put it on pause, put that new map on pause. Yesterday, the Supreme Court said, actually, Texas, you can move forward with that map as it currently stands. So, again, it seems like when Texans go to the polls next year, they'll be voting on seats that reflect that new map. Republicans expected to pick up to 5 seats in the Lone Star State as a result of those changes. Democrats, to be clear, trying to make aggressive redistricting moves on their own. The state of California passing, of course, that complicated ballot referendum to allow Governor Gavin Newsom to put in place a partisan redistricting process, allowing Democrats to pick up 5 seats in the Golden State. So, again, the question of whether the impact of Texas redistricting will be seen in next year's midterm elections, that is still not known. It could be washed out by what we're seeing in California. And furthermore, the Democratic overperformance we saw in those special elections earlier this week in Tennessee, yielding a massive question. Even if Republicans change these seats to favor their members, can Democrats still defy the odds and create a blue wave in the upcoming 2026 midterm elections? That, again, still an open question. But as you and I have both seen, Democrats appear to be favored to retake at least the House of Representatives. Remember, Republicans only have the slimmest of majorities right now.
Yeah, and Democrats certainly encouraged by performances in Tennessee, Florida, Arizona, some of those special elections, of course, the governor races in Virginia and New Jersey as well. All right, a lot more to come in the year ahead. Congressional correspondent Nate Reed for us. Nate, thank you. And now let's take a look at some of our other top headlines of the day. The U.S. military struck another suspected drug boat in the Eastern Pacific, killing 4 people on board. Southern Command says intelligence confirmed the vessel was carrying illegal drugs along a known trafficking route. This marks nearly 24 such strikes by the U.S. in the Caribbean and Pacific, with at least 87 people killed in total. And President Trump has replaced the architect of his $300 million White House ballroom project. James McCreary II, his boutique firm, reportedly couldn't meet deadlines and clashed with the president over the building's size. Veteran Washington architect Shalom Barnes will now take over the massive project. Barnes has designed government buildings in D.C. for decades. And Netflix is expanding its reach. The streaming giant had just announced a deal to buy Warner Brothers Discovery and HBO. The total price tag for both, $82 billion. Scripps News national correspondent Mitch McCann is live in New York. So, Mitch, what does this deal actually mean for consumers?
Yeah, hi, Andrew. For consumers, it's not exactly clear yet what this will mean, but it could mean a few different things depending on what Netflix decides to do. It may mean that HBO Max and Netflix become sort of one streaming giant service rather than the two that they currently are. Less competition with more to offer could mean higher subscription prices. But what Netflix is actually saying today is that members will have even more high-quality titles from which to choose. They say it allows Netflix to optimize its plans for consumers and enhance viewing options as well. Now, this deal will see Netflix buy 2 of Warner Brothers Discovery's most valuable assets, its film studios as well as its streaming service, HBO Max, for that significant figure that you mentioned there, representing a takeover of one of Hollywood's oldest and most acclaimed businesses by a streaming giant. Now, one important note here, I think, is that this is not a done deal. It's very possible there's going to be a long regulatory battle over this involving the US government, who are going to be casting a very close eye on it. We've seen the government already get involved with various entertainment company mergers this year, like Paramount, Skydance. We've already seen them sort of get involved there. So there are reports that the White House is viewing this deal with skepticism. Of course, it's very early days. Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery are very optimistic about it, but there's a long process ahead.
Yeah, Mitch, important note there that this would be a long way off if it even happens. I think one of the other questions that seemed like it was not included in this deal is some of those TV assets like CNN and TNT. What could that mean for those entities?
Yeah, this is really important to note. So this does not include Warner Brothers Discovery's TV networks like CNN, TBS, TNT, as you mentioned. That is another part of Warner Brothers Discovery that has been spun off into a separately listed company. Now, that's reportedly set to happen in the third quarter of next year, which is when these companies, Warner Brothers Discovery and Netflix, hope this deal involving their merger will be able to be completed. Now, it's also important to note that David Zaslav, he's the current chief executive of the company. He's going to continue running it until the transaction is complete. And it's important as well that only a couple of moments ago, I looked at the share prices of these companies. Netflix was down actually around 2.8%, whereas the seller, Warner Brothers Discovery, was up more than 3%. So a few different thoughts there from investors. But as I say, a long way to go, but optimism from both these companies about this merger so far.
All right, much more to come there. Scripps News national correspondent Mitch McCann for us. Mitch, thank you. Coming up on Today As It Happened.
It's been over 50 years that the Vietnamese have been in the U.S. and in New Orleans. They've raised families, like open businesses, like become part of the culture, the fabric of this country. And now they're getting ripped apart.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories.
Starting with breaking news this afternoon, a federal judge in Florida has ordered the release of transcripts from grand jury investigations into Jeffrey Epstein. Now, a similar bid was rejected earlier this year. U.S. District Judge Rodney Smith said he was granting the DOJ's renewed request in light of the bill Congress passed last month that requires the Justice Department to release all of its records publicly related to Epstein. So the judge's order today doesn't address when the transcripts will be released, but according to that new law that was signed on November 19th, that all the documents need to be released within 30 days. Police in Kerrville, Texas, have released more than 20 hours of 911 calls from the deadly July 4th floods that killed 136 people. Chief Chris McCall says the calls are unredacted and very difficult to listen to. He says some callers did not survive the catastrophic floods that swept across Texas Hill Country. Just 2 dispatchers answered 435 calls over 6 hours as the disaster unfolded.
NOPD, KKK, IDF, they're all the same.
A New Orleans City Council meeting was abruptly halted Thursday after a group of attendees started protesting. The protesters were angry after the council president suspended public comment. People had been speaking out against immigration raids happening in the city. And right now we're learning that agents in New Orleans are focusing on a different group of people, the Vietnamese community. Scripps News national correspondent Katia Tubman is live in New York, and she's been following this story for us. So, Katia, what more can you tell us about this situation?
Well, good afternoon, Stephanie. The operation has been dubbed Catahoula Crunch, formerly known as Operation Swamp Sweep, and it's a 2-month operation in New Orleans, Louisiana, that began earlier this week with a goal of arresting 5,000 people. Now, Border Patrol official Gregory Bovino, who has led similar operations in other states, is now in New Orleans, and he has been posting videos of arrests to the CBP account. And even one video that has captured what's happening on the ground there has has shown agents pulling a roofer from a job in Kenner, Louisiana, that's just outside of New Orleans, showing that the scope of this operation isn't just within the metro area of the city, but can reach further outside of it. Now, this operation, Stephanie, comes amid, as I said, after similar ones in North Carolina, Chicago, and Los Angeles, and it's a part of the Trump administration's crackdown on illegal immigration. And largely cities in Democratic-led states, cities identified as either having sanctuary jurisdictions or having sanctuary city policies, have been targeted. And we're hearing support from Republicans in Louisiana specifically in support of these operations. U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, for example, who is from Louisiana, saying on X his support for the operations, that Democrats' sanctuary city policies have failed, making our American communities dangerous. The people of our great city deserve better, and help is now on the ground. Well, on the ground right now, we're hearing from locals that it is a very scary place. Many of the businesses as well as the streets have been emptied out, especially particularly areas with high concentration of Hispanic or Latino or Vietnamese communities. And these communities are on edge, particularly as you mentioned earlier, the Vietnamese community there, which is pretty large. Many of them had settled in New Orleans due to the weather after the fall of Saigon, the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. And for the past half century, they have been building lives and homes for their families and descendants ever since. And we spoke to one person, one local there who is paying attention to what's happening in her community, T. Boy, who was born at the end of the war, just days of the end of the war, and came to the U.S. as a refugee at the age of 3. She lives in New Orleans, and she told us the operation feels like a major betrayal for a community that has spent, like I said, the last half century building lives for themselves in New Orleans and making it such a significant cultural hub. And here's what she had to tell us about the experience on the ground right now.
The folks who came here in the 70s were allies of the U.S. in a proxy war that the U.S. got involved in, probably shouldn't have gotten involved in, but because the U.S. was there, now the refugees of that war have to come here. And they rebuilt their lives from scratch. And now this is their home. It's been over 50 years that the Vietnamese have been in the U.S. and in New Orleans. They've raised families, open businesses, become part of the culture, the fabric of this country. And now they're getting ripped apart. Their families are getting torn apart. They are in a constant state of dread. And it's really hard to live like that.
And Bowie told us that dread is only enhanced. It's been around for several years, but only has gotten worse as this year has come along. In September, the city saw several arrests of dozens of Vietnamese immigrants just within the past few months. And so right now they're looking at this operation as a huge threat to their livelihood as well as their lives. Overall, we reached out to DHS as well as Border Patrol to ask about the number of arrests that have taken place so far. And while Border Patrol has not responded to our comment request just yet, we heard from DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin in a statement saying that in just 24 hours on the ground, our law enforcement officers have arrested violent criminals with rap sheets that include homicide, kidnapping, child abuse, robbery, theft, and assault. Like I said, Border Patrol is on the ground right now in New Orleans. These communities are responding, and we're following along as these operations develop. Stephanie?
Yeah, and as we've seen in other cities, while the administration might say they are targeting people with criminal backgrounds who have been accused of or convicted of serious crimes, some people are getting swept up that don't have a criminal history, and that's been part of the controversy around this immigration effort. Scripps News national correspondent Katie Tepin live in New York for us. Thanks so much for following this story.
Up next on Today As It Happened.
We see patients who have chronic hepatitis, who have hepatitis B that is now completely preventable. Cirrhosis, liver cancer, hepatocellular carcinoma is a terrible disease.
You're watching Today As It Happens, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. Let's jump right in.
The coldest air in the season is invading the Midwest and the Northeast. This morning, it was 6 degrees in Scranton, Pennsylvania, -4 in Plattsburgh, New York, 0 in Springfield, Illinois, and 3 degrees in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Meanwhile, here in Washington, D.C. and most of Virginia, we're getting our first snowfall of the season. As you can see there live at the White House, some areas could get up to 3 inches before the snow stops falling. European Union regulators fined Elon Musk's social media platform X $140 million for breaching digital regulations. The European Commission says X violated transparency requirements under the Digital Services Act. It's the first time the EU has issued a non-compliance decision under the sweeping rulebook.
X has indeed breached its transparency obligation under the DSA. This includes X's blue checkmark. It deceives users. Anyone can pay to obtain the verified status, and X does not meaningfully verify who is behind it. It also includes X advertising repository, which does not work properly, and X doesn't provide effective data access for researchers. Failure to comply with the non-compliance decision may lead to periodic penalty payments on top of today's fine.
And there is a major shift today in long-standing vaccine guidance for newborns. A CDC advisory panel, now largely appointed by Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., well, they voted to roll back the universal recommendation that all babies receive a hepatitis B shot within 24 hours of birth. Now, critics are warning this move could reverse decades of progress against a virus that can quietly lead to lifelong liver disease. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett joining me now live from our DC newsroom. So, Maura, spell out exactly what is changing under this new recommendation.
Stephanie, so the panel voted 8-3 to remove this recommendation. It's for infants whose mothers test negative for hepatitis B, which, as you mentioned, is a liver infection that can ultimately cause things like cirrhosis or liver failure later in life. And so it's very serious. And doctors and parents are now directed to use what they're calling shared decision making, meaning that the first dose can be delayed until the baby is 2 months old. Now, babies born to mothers who are positive or whose status is unknown can still receive the shot at birth. So that's where that shared decision making comes into play. But ultimately, this reverses a 30-year policy that was designed at the time to catch missed or incorrect maternal tests. And since this was put into place back in 1991, there has been a 99% decline in cases among children and young adults. Now, as you mentioned, all of this comes under the veil of Secretary Kennedy Jr. Replacing the panel. And since then, there's been a lot of decisions that folks in the medical space have really pushed back against. So much so that a recent poll shows that Americans are actually more likely to accept guidance on vaccines from the American Medical Association than from the CDC, which is what this advisory panel sits under right now. It's important to know the American Medical Association does still support the newborn vaccination process. And so this just comes after several meetings in which vaccine recommendations have since been reversed, Stephanie.
So what kind of public health risk are we looking at here? What are doctors warning about, people who wanted the hepatitis B vaccine recommendations to remain the way they had been?
Well, to put it in short, people are concerned, the medical community is concerned that this is just going to increase the risk of infection and actual infections that we see. Public health groups say that delaying this birth dose removes a critical safety net, that roughly 1,000 maternal infections can go undetected annually in the U.S. And so that's why the birth dose was so important in case a mother had not been tested. And so even a single missed case at birth, they say, can lead to a 90% chance of chronic lifelong infection for the baby. I wanted to hear a little bit more from Dr. Rochelle Walensky. She used to lead the CDC. She's now at Harvard Medical School. And she talked about how serious this infection can be for a baby as they grow up later in life.
Especially in the context of a practicing infectious disease clinician, we see patients who have chronic hepatitis, who have hepatitis B that is now completely preventable. Cirrhosis, liver cancer, hepatocellular carcinoma is a terrible disease. And so when you recognize that you are at the bedside of somebody who has a terrible clinical course that would otherwise be prevented, it is again reiterates why this is such an important intervention.
Now, former advisory board members argue that today's vote wasn't grounded in mainstream evidence. They noted that several meeting presenters had ties to anti-vaccine activism. That's something that we've discussed when the panel reviewed the MMRV vaccine as well as the COVID recommendations. But supporters of the change say that the risk can potentially be manageable if maternal screenings improve and parents stay on schedule for the later doses. But ultimately, the broad medical advice we're getting is that each parent should be consulting specifically with their doctor to make the decision that is best for their family. Steph.
And now more of this vaccine advisory panel. It's not 100% yet. It still needs the CDC current director to approve it and make it formal. Are we expecting that that will happen?
Correct. That is expected to go through. That's what we've seen with these other recommendations that have happened. That has not happened yet, but that is something that we do expect to happen. What remains to be in question is the insurance coverage of it all, right? We covered this with the COVID vaccine recommendations a couple months ago, and ultimately insurance companies did decide, even though it's not required or formally recommended anymore, they're still covering those vaccines. And so that's the next decision that we'll have to be tracking in terms of how patients can be covered if they decide to continue with the dosages at birth, technically against the recommendations of this panel. But again, that will depend on when it gets formally adopted, and then it's up to each of the respective insurance companies to make that decision.
Certainly could have very large implications here. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett, thank you very much.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
Let's see.
Are you sure? Are you sure this is the ball? You can still change it if you want.
Does he know something that I don't know? Let's give it a shot.
Let's give it a shot. Let's give it a shot. I agree.
Well, we're glad you're back with us with Today As It Happened. I'm Andrew Rafferty here with your daily rundown of today's top stories.
Man accused of planting a pipe bomb outside the Republican and Democratic National Committee headquarters on January 5th, 2021, will remain in jail. He faced a judge earlier this afternoon. He hasn't entered a plea yet, but the FBI says Brian Cole Jr. confessed. Cole reportedly indicated he believed the 2020 election was stolen and expressed views supportive of President Trump. The 30-year-old from Virginia was arrested Thursday after a nearly 5-year investigation. The Eurovision Song Contest is facing its biggest crisis in 7 decades after 4 countries walked out over Israel's participation. Organizers declined to expel Israel over its conduct during the war in Gaza. Spain, the Netherlands, Ireland, and Slovenia announced they will not take part in the 2026 contest in Vienna as a result. Iceland is also considering whether to boycott the competition.
Mr. President, this is your prize. This is your Peace Prize. There is also a beautiful medal for you that you can wear everywhere you want to go.
FIFA awarded President Trump the inaugural FIFA Peace Prize at the 2026 World Cup draw. The award recognizes his efforts to work toward peace around the world. He was heavily favored to win the newly created prize. FIFA President Gianni Infantino is a close ally of the president. And happening today, President Trump could meet with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. The 3 North American leaders participated in that FIFA World Cup drawing happening here in Washington as each country prepares to co-host the quadrennial competition next year. The ceremony comes as both American allies are looking to President Trump to discuss a range of issues from trade to immigration. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull joining us live now from a snowy White House. So, Haley, this event was about next year's World Cup, but there were major diplomatic undertones to what was happening. So what do we know about these 3 leaders meeting on the sidelines?
Yeah, Stephanie, all about the World Cup, but at the same time offering an opportunity for conversation between the world leaders with President Trump, Canada's President Prime Minister Mark Carney, and Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum in attendance. And in the box, as President watched, you could see he interacted with each leader. But he had also suggested there was the potential for the leaders to meet on the sidelines of this event. potentially to talk about trade and immigration. Now, this comes as the landmark trade agreement between the three nations is set for a review next summer, and as the first public hearing on the USMCA was held this week. And more broadly, as President Trump has sought tougher immigration measures as well as tougher trade policies with other countries, in part tied to reciprocity as well as immigration. But as you mentioned, the president also receiving that FIFA Peace Award coming as this week he celebrated an agreement signing between leaders of Rwanda and the Congo. But as his administration continues efforts to reach a deal between Russia and Ukraine, one that has remained elusive as negotiators for the Ukrainians as well as the United States continued their talks in Florida today, we understand. President Trump touting his peacemaking efforts while accepting that award. Listen.
This is truly one of the great honors of my life. And beyond awards, Johnny and I were discussing this. We saved millions and millions of lives. The Congo, as an example, over 10 million people killed, and it was heading for another 10 million very quickly. And it just, you know, the fact that we could do that, India, Pakistan, so many different wars that we're able to end, in some cases a little bit before they started, just right before they started. It was going to be late, but we got them done.
And so, Stephanie, certainly a significant event, one the president frequently touts as the U.S. Gets ready to play its part hosting the World Cup, coinciding with the country's 250th birthday, Stephanie.
Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull live for us in the snowy, cold Washington, D.C. today. Haley, thank you very much. Both houses of Congress are out of session today, even though millions of Americans are looking at their calendars and wondering if lawmakers can find a way to extend the Obamacare subsidies that are due to expire at the end of the year. Voters on both sides of the aisle overwhelmingly want the tax credit extended, according to the latest KFF poll. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed reports on where the ACA subsidy negotiations stand today.
There are just 2 weeks to go before Congress is slated to leave Washington till 2026, and that holiday crunch is making the chances of passing a bill to extend expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies look increasingly unlikely. Democrats Thursday unveiling their plan to vote in the Senate this coming week on a 3-year extension of expiring subsidies, but it's not clear if many Republicans will join the effort.
Every single Democrat will support it. Every single Democrat. That means Republicans have only 1 week to decide where they stand.
A bipartisan group of lawmakers in the House of Representatives Thursday also unveiling a proposal to extend current health care subsidies, but it's not clear that will have the support needed to pass either. Some Republicans are urging their colleagues to address the looming health care cliff before the midterm elections.
If Republicans don't address health care before 2026, are you concerned that your party could be punished in the midterms?
I just think it's an opportunity. Health care really hasn't been addressed for years. Forget about the 2026 election. It's just good for the American people. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and I then believe that the American people would reward us.
President Trump had previously supported a version of the Affordable Care Act subsidy extensions, but has since endorsed other potential solutions, including a possible plan that would deposit federal dollars into health savings accounts for Americans to use on health care. But Republicans in Washington have historically struggled to coalesce around a plan to lower the cost of health care and agree on a suitable replacement for the Affordable Care Act. President Trump made repealing and replacing Obama's signature health care law a priority of his first term. And nearly a decade later, Republicans are still trying to find a viable alternative. With just 2 weeks to go, it seems unlikely that lawmakers will reach a solution without a major sea change or an 11th-hour lobbying effort of congressional Republicans by President Donald Trump. Nathaniel Reed, Scripps News Group, Washington.
Up next on Today As It Happened.
I'm John Matteries. December brings lots of sales and even more sales as the month goes on. We'll show you some of the things to look for later this month.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Andrew Rafferty. Let's jump right back in on our rundown of today's top stories.
The Trump administration will expand its travel ban to more than 30 countries. That's according to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. The expansion builds on a ban already announced in June, which barred travel from 12 countries and restricted access from 7 others. Noem says President Trump is still evaluating which countries to include. The latest restrictions come after a man from Afghanistan was accused of shooting 2 National Guard members in the nation's capital. A Missouri appeals court ordered a new wording for a ballot measure seeking to roll back abortion rights in the state. The court ruled voters must be told the amendment would repeal reproductive health care rights they just approved a year ago. The Republican-led legislature placed the new amendment on the 2026 ballot to try to repeal the previous one. It would only allow abortions for medical emergencies, fetal anomalies, or in cases of rape or incest. A federal grand jury has decided not to indict New York Attorney General Letitia James. This was the second time a grand jury weighed charges against her. In October, the Justice Department secured an indictment against James on charges of bank fraud and making false statements on a loan application. But last month, a federal judge tossed those charges, saying the prosecutor, Lindsay Halligan, was unlawfully appointed to serve as the interim U.S. attorney.
December is the holiday shopping season's final act. Prices on a lot of gifts start to fall as the month goes on and then really drop the day after Christmas.
Carissa Medford looks forward to December shopping.
I don't like all of the hustle bustle and fighting the crowds of everybody on Black Friday.
Another reason to wait for mid-December? Mall manager Dave Jacoby says many bricks and mortar retailers start rolling out in-store only markdowns.
Gift with purchases. A lot of times retailers will offer deals that they'll only offer in person. They might not offer them online.
This month, finding sales isn't the hard part.
No matter what you're shopping for, it's going to be on sale.
It's knowing when to buy for the best deals and making sure those gifts arrive on time. Consumer Reports deals editor Samantha Gordon says you can find stockings full of savings in the lead up to the holidays, starting with Green Monday. That's the second Monday of December, when stores see a surge in last-minute online purchases. Next up, Free Shipping Day on December 14th.
Free Shipping Day is your last chance to buy online and have guaranteed free shipping with guaranteed delivery by Christmas Eve.
The 20th is Super Saturday, the last Saturday to shop before Christmas.
That's where you're going to see in-store sales.
Gordon recommends shoppers compare prices. Check a store's price match policy in case the price drops. Use in-store pickup to avoid shipping delays.
Go right to the customer service desk, pick up your purchase, and then you're right back out the door again.
And ask for gift receipts. Lacey Calloway is one of many shoppers hunting for deals all month long.
I spread it out, and I do some of it online, but I still prefer to shop in person.
And that way you don't waste your money. John Mattery, Scripps News Group.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
Observers of this issue will note that fentanyl does not come from Colombia or Venezuela or any South American countries. It primarily comes from Mexico. Welcome back to Today As It Happened, Scripps News debrief of our top stories of the day. Let's jump right back in.
And this week on Capitol Hill, lawmakers watched the video of the September boat strikes that allegedly killed 2 survivors. And the reaction to the video, well, that was split down party lines. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth addressed the controversy earlier this week in a cabinet meeting with President Trump.
We know who's on it, what they're doing, what they're carrying. All these white bales are not Christmas gifts from Santa. This is drugs running on 4-motor fast boats or submarines that we've also struck. No one's fishing on a submarine. And I have empowered them to make that call. Now, the first couple of strikes, as you would, as any leader would want, you want to own that responsibility. So I said, I'm going to be the one to make the call after getting all the information and make sure it's the right strike.
Joining us now is James Martin, a U.S. Coast Guard veteran who's also a Democrat running for a congressional seat in Florida. So, James, thanks so much for spending some time this afternoon. I want to start with, the question of the day. So, what is your take on the Trump administration's continued strikes in the Caribbean and the Pacific?
Sure. Well, thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate you having me on to talk about this important issue. The first thing I would want the general public to know is, of course, that the rationale that we've been given for these strikes is not quite adding up. Of course, the rationale being explained is that the administration has labeled these folks as narco-terrorists, which then gives them the authority to, who are trafficking fentanyl into this country. Observers of this issue will note that fentanyl does not come from Colombia or Venezuela or any South American countries. It primarily comes from Mexico. So already this starts off on shaky ground. I can tell you from my experience being out on the water on some of these strikes, of course, the first strike was famously, there were 11 people on board, right? And in my experience, both on the water and controlling some of these assets from sort of what we call the operational level, is I've never seen 11 folks on a go-fast boat, which is what we would call them. And the reason for that, of course, is these cartels are a business. And so I think that really diverges from the secretary's explanation, because when we see 11 folks on this boat and he says that we know all of these folks are on board, it just doesn't add up with a smuggling scenario. And of course, that explanation famously changed when the Pentagon briefed lawmakers a few weeks ago. So that's my initial take.
I want to dig in. Well, I want to dig in more into your experience with the Coast Guard. You helped stop drug traffickers who were presumably bound for the U.S. So how did you and your team typically intercept them?
Sure. Well, that's the second piece of this, Stephanie, and it's very important to note that when we do interdict these folks on the water, most Americans might not appreciate that we actually extract very good intelligence from these folks, and while it might not be extremely satisfying to folks, it takes that evidence, all is compiled, and it takes sometimes years to compile a case against cartel bosses. But that's what the information we're extracting in those scenarios does. In addition to, of course, keeping hundreds of thousands of tons of illicit narcotics off of American streets.
Well, what type of intelligence did you usually have available to you? Secretary Hegseth has been very confident saying, we know without a shadow of a doubt, we know what's on these boats, we know what they're doing. What type of intel was typically available to your teams? How did you know that a boat was trafficking drugs?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Stephanie, because I have been in many scenarios, both on the water and controlling a number of these assets at a time, when we were given what, to use a technical term, would be rock solid intelligence, and then we're on deck on these boats and the drugs are not there. So it gives me real pause when I hear the secretary say and speak in such authoritative statements like this, saying that there are absolutely drugs on deck, and we know that without a shadow of a doubt.
Well, the other thing that these strikes presumably are different in terms of the military personnel involved. It's presumably much less risky for these military strikes to happen versus having, Coast Guard officials on another boat and intercepting alleged traffickers. Do you think this type of strike versus, the boat-to-boat interdiction, do you think this is maybe a more effective deterrent for drug traffickers, this method the Trump administration is using?
Well, I would say two things to that, Stephanie. The first would be that typically intercepting these loads in international waters is the safest way to conduct the interdictions, because at sea they're the most vulnerable. To your second point, I strongly feel that we're not going to see a deterrent effect, because as I mentioned earlier, these cartels are a business, and whether these loads are intercepted or they're blown up, unfortunately, that is not going to enter into their risk calculus. They're going to keep sending these boats. So the thing to know is that while we're doing it this way, and it might feel that it's more efficient, quote unquote, it's actually counterproductive to U.S. interests. And we've seen this already, right? We've seen the United Kingdom, our closest ally, the special relationship, has ceased intelligence sharing with us over these strikes. So I think that's the really important thing to know, that we're not going to see a deterrent effect. And even if we say that we do, it's most likely because other countries have stopped sharing information with us, and we're not making that call authoritatively or with a basis in fact.
Well, we've typically experienced a bit of a delay from when these strikes actually happen until the Trump administration publicly announces it. But based on what you know about the frequency of these strikes, does that track with your experience on the water and your experience with the Coast Guard, that the number of vessels that are being intercepted and attacked, does it seem like it tracks with the type of intelligence that you would typically have when you were in the Coast Guard?
I would say yes, but the other thing to understand is, of course, this is a problem that has been chronically under-resourced by the United States. So what we typically see on the water is probably only 10 to 20%. You know, that's a rough number, but that's probably 10 to 20% of the number of drugs that are moving every day. You know, and there are variables such as weather, things of that nature. But overall, I would say yes, it comports with the normal flow.
James Martin, U.S. Coast Guard veteran, current congressional candidate in the state of Florida. Thanks so much for sharing some of your expertise with us this afternoon.
Thanks, Stephanie. Really appreciate the time. And if I could just add at the end here, I think what is important to me, and why this is important in particular to my district, is my member of Congress, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, has gone on and cheered these actions on in the national media. And as I've said, they're counterproductive to U.S. interests. And instead of focusing on the real problems that folks in this district have, such as chronic unaffordability, we're cheering on these lawless strikes. So thanks again for having me on, Stephanie. And if folks want to learn about the campaign, they can find me at jamesmartinforflorida.com. Thanks again.
Thank you. The table is now set for the most watched sporting event in the world, the FIFA World Cup. Starting with 48 countries from across the globe, only one will host the Golden Trophy at the end of the tournament. International correspondent Ross Cullen reporting from Paris on who the U.S. will face first.
So that is that. After more than an hour and a half of build-up, a lot of razzmatazz, performances from Lauryn Hill and Nicole Scherzinger, there was even time to award President Trump the inaugural FIFA Peace Prize. Eventually, we have learned the makeup of next summer's pool stage for the 2026 Men's Football or Soccer World Cup. We know the US has been drawn with Australia and Paraguay and another team to be decided in the playoffs. Canada facing Switzerland and Qatar, the hosts last time out, plus one more team from the playoffs. And Mexico going up against South Korea, South Africa, and a playoff team. In fact, Mexico's match against South Africa will be the inaugural game of the tournament on the 11th of June next year. In terms of predictions, hard to look much past the top four in the men's rankings at the moment. Spain, Argentina, France, and England. Argentina are the holders. Can they hold on to their trophy? France won in 2018 and got to the final last time out, and Spain and England do have very strong teams at the moment. Of course, the United States, Canada and Mexico will be hoping for a fairy tale, but whatever happens, the stage is now set for the biggest sporting events on the planet to get underway in just 6 months' time. Ross Cullen, Scripps News Group, Paris.
Thank you for joining us on Today As It Happened. I'm Andrew Rafferty. Have a great Friday night and an excellent weekend.